You may have heard about the traumatic incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. But what you probably haven't heard is how the story went public in part because of the Black liberation movement in the 1960s and 70s. This is how that happened. We have to start in the 1950s, when a fear of communism swept across the US. Congress passed the Emergency Detention Act, which allowed the government to imprison people on simply the assumption they might be security threats, just as they had done to Japanese Americans during World War II. At the time, not many people knew that over 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned during World War II. When they were finally released after the war, most didn't want to talk about this deeply painful experience. Flash forward to the 70s, and the civil rights era was fully underway. Black leaders were creating change for people everywhere. In that spirit, many young Japanese Americans were learning about the camps for the first time.
I met this black guy from Washington, D.C. named Myron Gray. He started to tell me about black politics, and then he said, your people were put in camp. And I looked at him, I said, what do you mean?
Many leaders in the Black community were being targeted by the government, and there was fear that the Emergency Detention Act could be used against them. To fight this, young Japanese Americans decided that it was time to speak up about their history and organized a national campaign to repeal the Menacing Act. As part of that campaign, artist and camp survivor Robert A. Nakamura created a touring exhibit of photos of the World War II Japanese American incarceration. This was the first time that photos of the American concentration camps were publicly displayed. The campaign was successful, and the Emergency Detention Act was finally repealed in 1971. However, to this day, the US government continues to target Black movements and employ devastating mass incarceration against the most vulnerable communities. History reminds us that we need to show up for each other because our liberation and education depend on our shared struggle.